Anoa came to me first as a girl, with quick eyes and the sort of hunger one recognizes at once if one has spent any time among books. Not hunger for bread, though I suspect there was some of that too, in the broad peasant sense in which all frontier folk are acquainted with want. No, hers was a rarer appetite. She wished to know. She wished to know what words meant, why old words meant more than new ones, why certain names in certain languages made the skin prickle, why the stars could be read, why one dream felt like nonsense and another like a sealed letter. I have known many students of this sort in my time, and most of them become either tolerable scholars or intolerable bores. Anoa, I fear, was always destined to become something else. I do not say that lightly. There are prodigies, and then there are those unlucky souls for whom the membrane between the ordinary world and the deeper one is simply thinner. Anoa was not merely talented, she was permeable. Lessons that should have taken a year settled into her in a fortnight. Symbols that others would labor over as if deciphering ants on a page she seemed almost to remember. I saw very early that she had power, though I flatter myself that I did not encourage it recklessly. I gave her structure, discipline, forms, names, cautions. One does not hand a frontier girl a lantern and send her dancing into a powder magazine. One teaches her first to fear flame. Yet that is the trouble with power in the young. One may teach fear and still discover later that fear is not the same thing as restraint. Anoa learned quickly enough that she could do things others could not. More dangerously, she learned that in moments of crisis, she could do what others would not. That distinction matters. A great many mages come to grief not because they are wicked, but because they are the only ones in the room prepared to act with sufficient decisiveness. History is full of such people. We build statues to some, pyres for others, and often the difference is merely whether they succeeded. I have loved the girl in my way, avuncularly, perhaps. A ridiculous word, but near enough. I was proud of her, certainly. Proud of her mind, her nerve, her refusal to remain what the world expected her to be. In Oldford, there are not many pathways open to a bright peasant woman, and fewer still that do not end in drudgery, childbirth, or the grave. If I opened a door for her, I do not repent it. I would open it again, but I would be lying if I said that pride has not long since soured into an admixture of dread. Pearson's death marked her in a way I do not think she will ever wholly recover from. Grief by itself is common enough. The world is a factory for grief. But grief joined to power, guilt, and the conviction that one has failed at the single thing one most meant to save, that is, alchemy of a ruinous kind. When the Commonwealth took him for their pious obscenities and civic mutilations, they did not merely seize a young man. They placed in Anoa's hand a question to which magic always offers the same seductive answer. If you had been stronger, would this have happened? It is a poisonous thought because it is half true. Strength does alter outcomes. One can save a life by force. One can also destroy 10 more in the attempt. What precisely occurred when she hunted those men down, I do not know. And I suspect there are parts of it she herself does not know, or will not permit herself to know plainly. I know enough. They died horribly. Pearson died too. Whether by their hand, by accident, by the violence of rescue, or by some convergence of all three is almost immaterial now. In Anoa's soul, the verdict has already been rendered. She meant to save and instead annihilated. Such moments become a hinge. After them, one either retreats from power, or one embraces the monstrous logic that since one has already crossed the threshold, one may as well become equal to the necessity that forced the crossing. Anoa, I think, has been walking toward that second conclusion for some time. And then there are the dreams. I have never trusted dreams entirely, even when they prove true, which they often do. Dreams are like diplomats. They arrive dressed in ceremony, conceal their patrons, and always leave one worse informed than one had hoped. But mine have of late been insistent. Yellow tatters at the edge of a chamber. A stage with no audience, and yet the unmistakable pressure of attention. The sound of a voice that does not speak to the ear, and yet leaves behind the unmistakable residue of courtesy. Always in these visions, some turn of the angle reveals a Noah where I had not first seen her, standing a little nearer the center than I would like, as if a spotlight was slowly finding her. The King in Yellow, if that is indeed the correct title for such a thing, has shown interest in her. I phrase it that way because all more definite formulations seem ludicrously insufficient. To say that he wants her would be too crude, too human. To say he has plans for her would imply a sequence and a simplicity I do not credit. Yet interest there is, attention, recognition, perhaps affinity. And there are few prospects in this world less comforting than to be noticed by a power whose relation to motive is at best oblique. I am not so provincial as to suppose the King in Yellow is merely evil. The cosmos does not divide itself so tidily for our convenience. Choronzon is unmaking, breach, the loosening of every bond that permits a world to remain a world. Against such a force, other dreadful things may stand not from charity, but from incompatibility. It may be that Hastur, if one must use names, is in some terrible sense a custodian of pattern, mask, order, story. It may be that he would preserve mankind as a playwright preserves a theater troupe. Not because he loves each actor as such, but because without them there is no drama. For all I know, he is kinder than many bishops. For all I know, he is the nearest thing in the outer dark to a gentleman. None of that reassures me. A tiger may be magnificent and not malicious. This is cold comfort to the man in the grass. My difficulty is that I no longer know what guidance is equal to the occasion. In ordinary apprenticeship, one teaches method, ethics, patience, concealment, scholarship, the necessity of not exploding when contradicted. But what does one say to a young woman of enormous gifts who has already learned that mercy can fail, law can fail, prayer can fail, and that the powers beyond the veil have begun to court her? Read more carefully, sleep well, do not bargain with entities from beyond time and symbol. Such advice has an admirable moral clarity and approximately no force whatsoever against the conditions in which she lives. I worry that every counsel I offer now is either too small or too late. If I urge restraint, I sound to her like one more timid elder whose caution is purchased with other people's blood. If I urge boldness, I become complicit in whatever she must become to survive the bold course. If I condemn the Yellow King's attention outright, I may only drive her toward him in secrecy. If I admit that some bargains may indeed be made for intelligible reasons, I loosen the final boards under our feet. This is discouraging in a fashion I have rarely known. I am a learned man. Learning is built, in no small part, upon the conceit that sufficient study renders the world navigable. But there are thresholds beyond which scholarship dwindles into witness. One can annotate the abyss, classify its manifestations, compare translations, dispute nomenclature, and still remain wholly unequal to the practical matter of keeping one beloved, brilliant, wounded soul from stepping too far into it. Perhaps that is the truth I most resist, that this may be above my pay grade, as the soldiers say. Not beyond my concern, never that, but beyond my mastery. I may not be the architect of a Noah's fate. I may be only one of its gentler influences, and not the strongest. There is humiliation in that for a teacher. One imagines oneself shaping a life, only to discover that history, grief, love, terror, and the gaze of impossible kings have all entered the classroom. Still, I cannot wholly despair. She remains herself, which is no small thing. She still loves fiercely. She still suffers. She is not yet one of those dreadful, serene persons who have surrendered personhood in exchange for purpose. So long as she can still be torn, she can still choose. My role, then, may not be to save her from every power that would name her. It may be merely to remain present long enough to remind her that she had a name before any of them noticed her, and that she was loved before she was ever useful. That is a small office, perhaps. But small offices are not contemptible. Someone must keep a lamp in the human rooms while larger things stride past outside. If the king in yellow has fixed his regard upon Honor, I cannot forbid the stars. I cannot close every door between this world and the next. I can only hope that when she stands at whatever threshold awaits her, she will still hear, however faintly, not the call of masks and crowns, but the voice of an old fool who once taught her letters and tried, in his inadequate way, to make knowledge a shelter rather than a weapon.